Welcome to the Research Desk. Today, we are looking at a company that is universally misunderstood.
Completely misunderstood. I mean, for decades, the public markets and the broader culture have categorized this entity with these labels that are, well, they are technically accurate, but strategically hollow.
Right. They call it a retailer, or they call it a sprawling logistics firm.
Or a dominant cloud computing provider. And, all of those descriptions are true. But they completely miss the underlying mechanism that actually generated those businesses.
Exactly. The central thesis we are examining today is that this company began as an online store, sure, but fundamentally transformed into a real-time measurement system for human demand.
Which is a massive shift.
It is. The genius of the business model is not found in the, millions of square feet of warehouse space.
Or the routing algorithms of the delivery vans. No, not at all.
The genius is this unparalleled, self-funding, compounding loop or commerce essentially acts as an operating system. Every single interaction feeds a centralized machine. It creates an economic engine that learns human behavior faster than any competitor could ever build a physical store. I look at this structure and I see the most perfect business model ever constructed.
Well, I look at it differently. The very system that created this unprecedented efficiency has built a formidable, maybe even insurmountable, wall of mistrust.
A wall of mistrust?
Yes. By instrumenting human demand to such an atomic degree, the company transitioned from merely serving the market to observing it entirely.
Okay, but observation drives the efficiency.
But that shift from an active participant in retail to an omniscient observer of global commerce creates an inevitable structural collision. It collides with the third-party sellers who supply the platform, and ultimately it collides with the broader society that regulates it.
So you are saying it is too efficient for its own good?
I'm saying we are looking at a platform that tracks demand so perfectly it basically becomes a surveillance state for consumer goods. The perfect information machine eventually and violently faces the limits of trust.
That is a stark way to frame it. But to understand this, we have to ask, what happens when a store stops guessing what you want and starts watching you figure it out?
Right.
To grasp the sheer magnitude of that shift, we really have to look backward. We have to look at the structural blindness of the physical retail environment that preceded this whole model.
Oh, the old world of retail was just defined by disconnected silos. Information did not flow at all. It just pooled in these stagnant, isolated containers.
Give me an example. Like, how did it actually work?
Well, picture the journey of a single consumer good in that era. Something simple, like a hardcover novel in the mid-1990s. The physical bookstore knew what left its shelves, right? But only after the item actually passed through the cash register.
Right, so the transaction was the only data point.
Exactly. And a regional wholesaler sat one step removed from that exchange. They saw bulk orders from hundreds of retail locations, but they never once saw the face of the actual customer. They had zero understanding of their actual intent.
And the publisher was even further insulated.
Oh, totally. The publisher only saw pallets shipped out and pallets of unsold inventory returned months later.
What about the physical location, the real estate?
The mall owner tracked aggregate foot traffic in the corridors, but they knew absolutely nothing about what happened inside the leaseholds. And the credit card networks, the financial layer, they saw the final transaction amount and the merchant category code.
But no browsing data.
Zero visibility into the browsing behavior that led to that transaction. Every single participant in the entire retail ecosystem saw just one thin, completely isolated slice of the customer journey.
And the speed of that information was practically glacial. Traditional retailers relied entirely on lagging indicators.
They looked at scanner data that was weeks old.
Right, scanner data aggregated over weeks. They conducted category reviews quarterly, if they're lucky. They plan their seasonal resets 6 to 8 months in advance.
It is wild to think about how slow it was.
It really is. If a retail executive in that era wanted to understand the consumer's mindset, they convened a focus group of 12 people in a sterile room with a two-way mirror.
That was their cutting-edge research.
Exactly. The entire global supply chain operated on gut intuition and delayed reporting. They were steering massive, capital-intensive businesses while essentially wearing a blindfold.
And think about the customer experience in that physical space. A customer could walk into a physical bookstore, pick up 5 different books, read the back covers, put 4 of them down, and carry 1 to the register.
Right, the discovery phase.
Yes. The entire process of discovery, comparison, hesitation, and selection just vanished into the ether. The physical store only recorded the final choice.
The winning book.
Right. The discarded options, the time spent weighing alternatives, the actual mechanics of human decision-making, all of that critical intelligence was completely invisible to the market.
And that structural blindness is what makes the foundational insight of electronic commerce a revolutionary. I mean, the model we are examining collapsed the entire funnel.
It brought everything together.
Exactly. For the first time in commercial history, search intent, product comparison, customer reviews, conversion, payment, and fulfillment were centralized under a single roof. E-commerce was not merely a new channel for distribution.
Though, to be fair, that is exactly how legacy retailers treated it for a decade, just another catalog.
To look back at traditional retail and not feel genuine awe that the industry survived for centuries with such incredibly poor signal fidelity.
They were flying blind.
They were. The new system removed the blindfold. It began measuring demand continuously at a level of resolution that physical retail simply could not match.
But because the funnel collapsed, a completely new problem emerged. The physical constraints of a shelf naturally limit selection, right?
Because you only have so much square footage.
Exactly. A buyer for a bookstore curates the inventory, and that inherently aids the consumer's discovery process. The internet removed the physical shelf entirely, making selection effectively infinite.
Which sounds great in theory.
But infinite selection without a mechanism for discovery is not a store. It is just noise. The customer is paralyzed by abundance. So the company had to solve the problem of navigating millions of SKUs without human curation.
And the solution to that was encoded in a phrase that became ubiquitous on the internet. Customers who bought this also bought.
Ah, yes, the classic recommendation engine.
Right, but it was not just a decorative feature tacked onto a website to make it look sophisticated. It was a declaration of corporate strategy. It signaled the permanent end of merchant intuition.
Meaning no more human buyers making guesses.
Exactly. The store would no longer employ human buyers to guess what shoppers might want to purchase next. Instead, it deployed collaborative filtering.
Let us dwell on the mechanics of that for a moment. Collaborative filtering uses the real-time behavior of millions of individuals to train the catalog. It is essentially a mathematical matrix.
How so?
If one product reliably leads to another product across thousands of isolated browsing sessions, the underlying algorithm surfaces that relationship automatically. The store learned from the collective action of its users. And the crazy part is, no single user knew they were part of a massive silent learning system.
Which is brilliant.
It is effective, certainly. Imagine a physical bookstore clerk who secretly follows you around the store. This clerk takes meticulous notes, not just on the book you eventually purchase, but on the 3 books you picked up, the pages you flip through, and the items you put back on the shelf.
That sounds incredibly creepy when you put it like that.
Well, now, multiply that clerk by 300 million shoppers simultaneously. That is collaborative filtering. Every product page became an active experiment.
Every search result became a hypothesis about human desire.
Exactly. Every abandoned shopping cart became a critical signal of price sensitivity or competitive friction. The information edge was never just a static database of customer profiles.
The edge was the loop itself.
The continuous, recursive loop of interaction. The store watches the customer navigate the catalog, while the customer watches the store update its recommendations in real time. The store fundamentally transformed into a sensor network.
And that changes the definition of scale. Scale in the old retail paradigm meant immense purchasing power, millions of square feet of physical real estate, and massive regional distribution centers.
Right, it was all about physical footprint.
But in this new paradigm, scale was redefined entirely. Scale meant recursive learning. Every single transaction made the subsequent transaction marginally smarter, more predictive, and more efficient.
And that learning loop did not just marginally improve book recommendations, right? It birthed completely distinct business units.
Oh, absolutely. Deeply integrated multi-billion-dollar business units that relentlessly reinforced one another. Let us actually look at the 2025 financial data to understand the staggering weight of these reinforcing layers.
The numbers are pretty wild.
They are hard to fully comprehend without seeing how they interlock. First-party retail is the original model. This is where the company buys inventory wholesale and sells it directly to the consumer.
The classic retail motion.
Exactly. In 2025, those online stores generated $261.2 billion in revenue. This layer basically served as the massive, high-volume laboratory. It was the testing ground for fulfillment logistics, warehouse robotics, and algorithmic pricing.
And first-party retail provided the sheer volume necessary to justify building a continental logistics network in the first place. But more importantly, it established the baseline consumer trust.
Trust is key here.
It is the foundation. Customers learn to trust the shipping speed and the return policy long before they ever realize who was actually supplying the goods.
Which brings us perfectly to the third-party marketplace. This is the precise moment the company transitioned from a traditional retailer into a commercial operating system.
Right, opening the doors to other sellers.
Third-party sellers supplied the infinite long tail of product selection. The sellers took on the inventory risk, the manufacturing risk, and the capital requirements themselves.
While the platform just sat in the middle.
In return, the platform supplied the customer traffic, the payment processing, and the logistics network. This marketplace layer generated $181.9 billion in 2025. It functions as a global toll road built squarely on top of the first-party laboratory.
A very profitable toll road.
Then we look at the subscription service, Prime. Subscription services hit $51.4 billion in 2025. This introduces a fascinating psychological mechanism into the business model.
How do you mean?
Think about it. How do you permanently alter consumer psychology? You introduce a membership with a high perceived sunk cost. Once a consumer pays upfront for expedited shipping and digital benefits, the psychological cost of initiating a product search on any competing platform feels like a financial loss.
They feel like they are wasting their membership if they shop elsewhere.
Exactly. The subscription guarantees that the customer begins their journey inside the closed loop.
The subscription converts sporadic, transaction-based relationships into habitual, default behavior. The frequency of purchase accelerates dramatically.
And frequency is data.
Yes, that acceleration in purchase frequency directly accelerates the volume of behavioral data feeding the sensor network. The subscriber is practically paying the company for the privilege of giving the company more data.
Which brings us to the final layer that wraps the entire ecosystem, capitalizing on all that data: advertising. In 2025, advertising services generated $68.3 billion in revenue.
That is a massive number just for ads.
It is, and it is crucial to distinguish this from traditional search engine advertising. A platform like Google, for example, infers commercial curiosity from text queries. This platform's advertising inventory sits directly next to the cash register.
It captures pure, unadulterated commercial intent.
Right. Advertisers are bidding on placements at the exact moment the consumer has their credit card in hand ready to transact.
So these are not separate corporate divisions operating in silos. They are vital organs within the same biological system.
Precisely. They feed each other.
The third-party seller listings constantly reveal category gaps and emerging consumer trends without the platform taking any research and development risk. The subscription frequency produces the massive data volume required to train the recommendation algorithms.
And the advertising bids reveal precisely where the highest profit margins exist in the broader market. It signals to the platform which categories are most lucrative.
The information gathered by one organ immediately nourishes the others. Now, you look at this and see a beautiful flywheel.
I really do.
But I look at this and see a highly efficient intelligence-gathering operation. It extracts capital from the seller to fund the infrastructure, extracts data from the consumer to train the algorithm, and then charges the seller again in the form of advertising just to reach the consumer they already acquired.
Okay, that is one way to look at it. But the sheer volume of this compounding data loop was so massive it eventually broke the company's own internal systems.
The traffic, the millions of continuous transactions, the complex matrix of third-party inventory updates, it was too much.
And the real-time advertising auctions.
Exactly. All of that required a computing infrastructure that simply did not exist anywhere in the world. They were forced to build standardized, highly scalable internal computing services just to keep their retail platform from collapsing under its own weight during peak shopping seasons.
The holidays would have broken them.
Right. And this internal crisis birthed the ultimate proof of their business model. Amazon Web Services. Let the 2025 numbers land with the weight they deserve. AWS generated $128.8 billion in net sales, growing at 19% year over year.
Incredible growth for something that size.
But more importantly, it generated $47.6 billion in operating income. In the fourth quarter of 2025 alone, AWS sales were $33.7 billion.
Wow.
The server infrastructure that was initially born purely to solve a bookstore's operational headache became one of the most profitable and dominant technology businesses on the face of the earth.
The historical blueprint here is really profound. We see this pattern rarely, but when it occurs, it reshapes entire industries.
Like who else?
Consider Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC. They act as the central foundry for global chip design. By manufacturing chips for everyone, they learn from every single designer's manufacturing challenges.
Compounding their process knowledge.
Exactly, until no one can catch them. Or consider Bloomberg, which embedded its terminals deeply into the daily workflow of global finance, becoming the inescapable operating system for traders.
That is a great comparison. The cloud division followed the exact same trajectory. The transferable lesson for any modern enterprise is this: do not just serve demand. Instrument it. Build a system architecture where your most complex internal cost centers can be standardized, packaged, and externalized as high-margin products for the rest of the market.
They turn their most expensive operational liability into their most lucrative asset.
Precisely. And the total company scale resulting from this model is just staggering. In 2025, total net sales reached $713.1 billion. That is an 11% increase from the previous year. Operating income hit $78.5 billion, and net income reached $72.6 billion.
Those numbers are almost hard to fathom.
The flywheel is usually described in pretty simplistic terms, Lower prices attract more customers, which attract more sellers, which increases selection, which drives economies of scale.
Which is accurate as far as it goes.
It is accurate but incomplete. It completely ignores the information layer. Every search query reveals intent. Every return reveals a mismatch in product quality. Every seller's fulfillment choice reveals the underlying economics of logistics.
The platform sees commerce entirely from the initial search query down to the server rack processing the transaction.
A normal logistics provider only sees the shipping weight and destination. A normal search engine only sees the text query. This platform sees the entire vertical stack.
But this is where we have to pause. What happens when a system becomes so perfectly instrumented that it sees the entire market from a vantage point no one else possesses?
They optimize it.
The tone of this analysis must shift here, because the very visibility that makes the customer experience frictionless creates a strategic nightmare for the millions of third-party sellers relying on the platform. Efficiency, when pushed to its absolute limit, begins to look entirely indistinguishable from surveillance.
Surveillance is a heavy word to use for retail analytics.
But look at the mechanics. The marketplace provides the platform with granular visibility into third-party performance. They see which specific products convert at the highest rates. They see which price points maximize margin.
Well, sure, it is their platform.
They see the exact velocity of inventory turnover for highly specific niche categories. This raises an unavoidable tension, leading to immense antitrust scrutiny and controversy surrounding in-house private label brands, like the whole Amazon Basics issue.
Right, the private label debate.
If the operator of the operating system sees exactly which third-party products succeed, can it genuinely resist using that proprietary data to compete against the very sellers who generated the insights?
I will admit, the conflict of interest is structural.
The platform acts as both the neutral umpire calling the game and the most powerful team playing on the field. When you own the infrastructure, the temptation to optimize for your own first-party retail margins is incredibly high.
And that brings us back to the wall I mentioned earlier. The wall we are discussing is not a rival tech company building a slightly better logistics network or a faster website. The wall is society.
You mean regulatory pushback?
Regulatory, but also fundamental trust. If sellers collectively conclude that the platform systematically weaponizes their operational data against them, the underlying economics of the marketplace fracture. Sellers are not captive forever.
They do have other channels now.
Exactly. If they believe the environment is rigged, they will withhold their best inventory. They will divert their capital investment to alternative channels. They will lobby aggressively for regulatory intervention.
It is a massive risk.
A platform that commands this much market visibility eventually makes its participants hesitate to interact with it. The moment the sellers and the consumers lose trust, they stop teaching the machine.
I can see that tension is the primary existential risk to the model. Customer obsession is a charming corporate philosophy when you are a small startup operating out of a garage.
Not so much when you are approaching $1 trillion in sales.
Right. At a $713.1 billion scale, that same relentless obsession with capturing and serving demand is inherently threatening to the broader economic ecosystem. The balance the company must strike is incredibly delicate.
Because they need both sides of the market.
They absolutely require third-party sellers to maintain the infinite selection that drives a subscription loop. But if the operating system is perceived as systematically rigged to favor first-party retail and private label goods, the flywheel loses its momentum.
Trust is the only thing that holds it together.
The trust problem is the single vulnerability capable of breaking the recursive learning loop. If regulators conclude the platform uses its gatekeeper status to unfairly privilege its own operations, the structural advantages of the collapsed funnel could be forcibly unbundled.
And the historical analog holds true here too. The more visible and dominant an information edge becomes, the more aggressively the surrounding ecosystem works to constrain it.
The shared truth that emerges from this analysis is really undeniable. This company did not win the retail war because it possessed the finest catalog of products or the most intuitive website design.
No, definitely not the website design.
Right. It secured its dominance because it successfully engineered the fastest, most comprehensive machine for learning what everyone else wanted to buy, sell, and compute.
The edge was learning.
The information edge was never the inventory itself. The edge was the continuous compounding loop of behavioral data. It collapsed discovery, pricing, fulfillment, subscription, and advertising into a singular, highly observable environment. It transformed retail from an industry of blind distribution into a science of real-time measurement.
Which leaves us with a lingering thought. As modern companies across all sectors increasingly attempt to build their own closed-loop data systems, the fundamental question shifts.
How so?
The critical metric is no longer who can build the most efficient product or the fastest supply chain. The question that remains is whether society, regulators, and market participants will continue to tolerate platforms that possess the capability to see the market from every conceivable side. This is the Research Desk, officially signing off.